Ambassador George Allen grits his teeth as the Zarantine High Counselor Shia mocks human waste elimination processes, the latest in a string of insults hurled at Earth's delegation during the diplomatic banquet. The opulent hall on the Zarantine homeworld buzzes with barely contained laughter from the alien dignitaries, their compound eyes glittering with amusement at humanity's expense. George maintains a facade of calm, years of diplomatic training kicking in as he endures the humiliation. But beneath his placid exterior, his mind races. These arrogant aliens have pushed too far, and it's time to teach them a lesson they won't forget. As Zhe concludes her tirade about human biology, George catches the eye of Dr. Emily Chen, the chief medical officer of the Earth delegation. A subtle nod passes between them, an unspoken plan forming in an instant. "High Counselor," George interrupts, his voice steady and confident. "If I may, I'd like to request a private meeting with your esteemed scientists. We've recently made a breakthrough that I believe will be of great interest to the Zarantine Federation." Shi's antennae twitch with curiosity. "Oh? And what might that be, Ambassador?" George allows a small smile to play across his lips. "A rare biological compound, unique to humans. It has potential medicinal properties that could revolutionize galactic medicine." The hall falls silent, the earlier mockery forgotten as the Zarantine lean forward, their interest piqued. Shia's compound eyes narrow, assessing the human before her. After a moment, she nods. "Very well, Ambassador. You'll have your meeting." As the banquet resumes, George discreetly confers with Dr. Chen. "Emily, I need you to collect urine samples from our entire delegation. Process them to look like a specialized nutrient extract. We're going to give these smug aliens exactly what they deserve." Dr. Chen's eyes widen, but she nods, understanding the gravity of the situation. Humanity's standing in the galactic community hangs by a thread, constantly undermined by species like the Zarantine, who view them as barely evolved primates. Hours later, George stands before a panel of Zarantine scientists, a vial of golden liquid held aloft. "Gentlemen, I present to you a substance that could change the course of galactic medicine. This extract, derived from a unique quirk of human biology, has shown remarkable properties in our preliminary tests." The Zarantine scientists crowd around, their interest evident in the way their antennae quiver. One reaches for the vial, but George pulls it back. "I'm afraid I can't release it just yet. We need to discuss terms." News of the human breakthrough spreads quickly through the Zarantine capital. High Counselor Xia, sensing an opportunity to assert Zarantine dominance, demands a public demonstration. George agrees, suppressing a smirk as he imagines the aliens unknowingly drinking human urine before a galactic audience. As preparations for the demonstration begin, tension mounts between the human and Zarantine delegations. The humans, aware of George's audacious plan, struggle to maintain their composure. The Zarantine, still riding high on their perceived superiority, remain oblivious to the humiliation that awaits them. George stands at the precipice of a diplomatic revolution. If his plan succeeds, it could reshape humanity's place in the cosmos. If it fails, the consequences could be catastrophic. As he watches the Zarantine eagerly prepare for the demonstration, he knows there's no turning back now. The stage is set for a galactic power play, with human urine as the unlikely star of the show. The grand hall of the Zarantine capital bustled with activity as final preparations for the demonstration were underway. George Allen stood at the edge of the stage, his outward calm belying the nervous energy coursing through him. He watched as ornate containers filled with processed human urine were carefully arranged on a central table, each one labeled with complex scientific terminology that meant nothing. High Counselor Xia strode onto the stage, his compound eyes gleaming with anticipation. The audience, a diverse array of alien dignitaries from across the galaxy, fell silent as Xia began his address. "Esteemed colleagues," Xia's voice boomed through the hall, "today marks a pivotal moment in galactic scientific advancement. Thanks to our superior Zarantine intellect, we have unlocked the potential of a biological compound from one of the lesser species." George's teeth gritted at the thinly veiled insult, but he maintained his diplomatic facade. He caught Dr. Chen's eye in the crowd, and they exchanged a subtle nod. As Xia continued his speech, a team of Zarantine scientists took the stage. They presented a series of holographic displays, showcasing their alleged findings on the extract's benefits. Our research indicates significant improvements in cognitive function, physical endurance, and even life extension, one scientist explained, gesturing to complex graphs and charts. The audience's initial skepticism began to wane, replaced by murmurs of intrigue. George noticed several alien diplomats leaning forward in their seats, their eyes fixed on the containers of disguised urine. Suddenly, Sia raised his hands for silence. To demonstrate our unwavering commitment to progress and our superior ability to harness the resources of lesser species, I shall be the first to partake of this miraculous extract. George's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't part of the plan. He watched frozen in place as Zia approached the table and lifted one of the containers. The hall fell eerily quiet as Zia raised the container to his mouth. George's pulse pounded in his ears, his mind racing through potential outcomes. As Zia took a long, deliberate drink, time seemed to stretch endlessly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Zia's eyes widened dramatically, his facial tentacles beginning to twitch and writhe. The audience leaned forward, expecting a wondrous transformation. Instead, a series of involuntary clicks and whistles erupted from Zia, the unmistakable sound of Zarantine retching. Gasps echoed through the hall as Zia's skin began to change color rapidly, cycling through a spectrum of hues. It was clear to everyone present that the High Counselor was experiencing a severe allergic reaction. Chaos erupted. Zarantine medical personnel rushed to Sia's aid, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. Other Zarantine officials turned to the human delegation, their compound eyes narrowing with suspicion and anger. "Sabotage!" one of them shouted, pointing an accusing appendage at George. Security forces began to converge on the human delegation. George felt a hand on his arm and turned to see Dr. Chen, her face pale but determined. "We need to move now," she whispered urgently. As they began to edge towards the nearest exit, a booming voice cut through the pandemonium. "Halt!" All eyes turned to the source of the command. A towering figure had entered the hall, its form shrouded in a shimmering cloak that seemed to bend light around it. The newcomer's presence was so commanding that even the panicked Zarantine fell silent. "I am Ambassador Zix of the Galactic Council," the figure announced, its voice resonating with authority. "This demonstration and its results will be thoroughly investigated before any accusations are made or actions taken." George felt a glimmer of hope. The Galactic Council's intervention could provide the breathing room they needed to explain, or, if necessary, escape. Ambassador Zix glided across the floor, coming to a stop between the human delegation and the advancing Zarantine security forces. High Counselor Sia will receive immediate medical attention. All samples of the extract will be confiscated for analysis. No one is to leave this hall until I have conducted preliminary interviews. As Zix turned its attention to the still retching Zia, George exchanged glances with his team. They were not out of danger yet, but at least they had a chance to regroup and strategize. The hall buzzed with tense whispers as various alien diplomats speculated on what had transpired. George overheard snippets of conversation, ranging from theories of human treachery to accusations of Zarantine incompetence. A small group of Zarantine scientists huddled near the sample table, furiously discussing something in hushed tones. One of them kept glancing nervously at the human delegation. George's mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. They needed to find a way to explain the extract without revealing its true nature, all while navigating the complex political landscape of interspecies diplomacy. As Ambassador Zix began to organize the crowd for interviews, George felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The next few hours would determine not just his fate, but potentially the future of humanity's place in the galactic community. He took a deep breath, straightened his posture, and prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The truth about the extract was bound to come out eventually, but perhaps there was still a way to turn this disaster into a diplomatic victory. As Ambassador Zix began organizing the crowd for interviews, George knew he had to act quickly. The situation was spiraling out of control, and the truth about the extract would inevitably come to light. With a deep breath, he made a decision that would alter the course of human-alien relations forever. "Ambassador Zix!" George called out, his voice carrying across the chaotic hall. "If I may, I'd like to address the assembly." The towering figure of Zix turned, its shimmering cloak rippling with the movement. "Proceed, Ambassador Allen, but choose your words carefully." George stepped forward, acutely aware of all eyes upon him. The Zarantine security forces tensed, ready to pounce at the slightest provocation. Dr. Chen shot him a worried glance, but he gave her a reassuring nod. "Esteemed members of the galactic community," George began, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. "I must confess that the substance consumed by High Counselor Sia is not a miraculous extract, but processed human urine." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a cacophony of alien exclamations. The Zarantine officials, initially sputtering with rage, fell into a stunned silence. George pressed on, raising his voice to be heard above the commotion. This deception was not undertaken lightly. It was a response to the constant mockery and discrimination humans have faced since joining the galactic community. He gestured towards the still retching Zia. The eagerness of the Zarantine to claim superiority over humans led them to overlook basic scientific protocols and ethical considerations. They were so quick to believe in their own supremacy that they failed to conduct even the most rudimentary tests on an unknown substance. Murmurs began to spread through the alien representatives. Some nodded thoughtfully, while others chittered and clicked in what seemed to be amusement. The mighty Zarantine, caught in their own trap of arrogance, had become the laughingstock of the galaxy. Suddenly, a new figure entered the hall. Taller than even Ambassador Zix, with iridescent scales that shimmered under the lights, the newcomer commanded immediate attention. "I am Ambassador Zorn of the Galactic Council," the reptilian being announced, its voice resonating with authority. "This incident requires immediate attention. I propose an emergency session of the Galactic Council to address these serious allegations of discrimination and the subsequent actions taken by the human delegation." George saw his opportunity. "We accept your proposal, Ambassador Zorn. The human delegation is prepared to provide full disclosure of the events leading up to this incident, including evidence of the discrimination and mockery we have endured." Ambassador Zorn nodded, his scales shifting colors slightly. "Very well. Security forces escort the human delegation to a secure holding area. They are to be treated with respect and given access to communication channels to prepare their case." As George and his team were led away, he caught snippets of conversation from the assembled aliens. Many seemed impressed by the humans' audacity, while others debated the ethical implications of the deception. In the holding area, a spacious room with comfortable seating and holographic displays, the human delegation quickly got to work. Dr. Chen accessed their secure databases, pulling up records of past discriminatory actions against humans in the galactic community. "George," she called out, her eyes wide as she scanned the data. "Look at this. The Zarantine have been systematically blocking human scientific contributions for years. They've buried our research, denied us access to shared resources, and even sabotaged some of our experiments." George nodded grimly. "Compile it all. We need a rock-solid case to present to the Council." As they worked, news of the incident spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Holographic news feeds in their holding area showed a mix of reactions: outrage from some species, amusement from others, and a growing sense of respect for the humans' clever maneuver. Hours passed as they prepared their case. George received a transmission from Earth's government, informing him that a high-level delegation was en route to support them at the emergency council session. Just as they were putting the finishing touches on their presentation, a Zarantine scientist requested entry to their holding area. Ambassador Zorn accompanied him, ensuring fair treatment. The scientist, looking uncomfortable, addressed George. "Ambassador Allen, our analysis of the substance has revealed something unexpected. Some compounds in human urine do indeed have potential medical applications for certain species in our galaxy." George raised an eyebrow, exchanging glances with Dr. Chen. This unexpected discovery could add another layer to their case. As the hour of the emergency session approached, tension mounted in the holding area. George gathered his team for a final briefing. "This is our chance," he said, looking each member in the eye. "We can reshape humanity's standing in the galaxy. Whatever happens in that council chamber, remember, we are fighting for the future of our species." A chime sounded, signaling it was time. As the doors slid open and they were escorted towards the Galactic Council chambers, George straightened his posture, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The fate of humanity and the stars hung in the balance, and he was determined to seize this moment. Opportunity to change humanity's standing in the galactic community. With a deep breath, he led his team out of the holding area and towards the grand chamber where the emergency session of the Galactic Council was about to begin. The halls of the Zarantine capital buzzed with activity as representatives from various alien species hurried to take their seats. George and his delegation were escorted by security forces, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous corridors. As they approached the entrance to the chamber, George caught sight of High Counselor Sia, his skin still slightly discolored from the earlier incident. Their eyes met briefly, and George saw a mixture of anger and embarrassment in the Zarantine's compound gaze. Ambassador Zorn's imposing figure stood at the center of the chamber, his iridescent scales shimmering under the bright lights. As George and his team took their seats, he felt the weight of countless alien eyes upon them. The atmosphere was thick with tension, curiosity, and anticipation. "This emergency session of the Galactic Council is now in order," Ambassador Zorn's voice boomed across the chamber. "We are here to address the incident involving the human delegation and their unconventional demonstration." George straightened his posture as Zorn continued. "Ambassador Allen, you have the floor to present your case." Taking a deep breath, George stood and approached the central podium. The holographic displays around him flickered to life, ready to project his evidence to the assembled delegates. "Esteemed members of the galactic community," George began, his voice steady and clear, "the events that transpired earlier today were not born out of malice, but out of desperation. Since humanity's introduction to this grand interstellar society, we have faced constant derision, mockery, and discrimination." He gestured, and the displays came alive with recordings of various alien species insulting humans, dismissing their achievements, and actively blocking their progress. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as delegates recognized their own species among the offenders. "We have been called primitive, barely sentient, and unworthy of galactic citizenship," George continued, his words carrying a hint of controlled anger. "Our scientific discoveries have been buried, our request for resources denied, and our attempts at collaboration sabotaged." The displays now showed data charts and reports detailing the systematic suppression of human contributions. George noticed several delegates shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "Our actions today were a direct result of this treatment. We sought to prove that appearances can be deceiving and that hasty judgments based on preconceived notions can lead to grave errors." As George delved deeper into his presentation, he saw the mood in the chamber begin to shift. Some delegates leaned forward, engrossed in the evidence. Others whispered among themselves, their expressions a mix of shame and intrigue. Suddenly, a harsh voice cut through the air. "This is outrageous!" High Counselor Sia had risen from his seat, his facial tentacles quivering with rage. "These humans have committed an act of biological warfare against me and my people. They should be severely punished, their planet quarantined." The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted over one another, some supporting Zia's claims, others defending the humans. Ambassador Zorn's voice thundered above the din, calling for order. As the commotion settled, Zorn spoke again. "We have a surprise witness who may shed new light on this situation. Dr. Kira Vex, please step forward." A female Zarantine scientist approached the podium, her movements precise and deliberate. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice calm and authoritative. "While the initial claims about the human extract were indeed false, our analysis has revealed something unexpected. Certain compounds found in human urine do possess potential medicinal properties for several species in our galaxy." This revelation sent another wave of whispers through the chamber. George exchanged a surprised glance with Dr. Chen, who nodded slightly, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Dr. Vex continued, displaying complex molecular structures on the holographic screens. These compounds could potentially lead to breakthroughs in treating several interspecies ailments. While the human's method of introduction was unorthodox, to say the least, it has inadvertently opened up a new avenue of scientific inquiry. As the implications of this discovery sank in, George noticed a group of delegates huddled together, deep in discussion. One of them, a tall, ethereal being with translucent skin, stood and addressed the chamber. "I am Ambassador Thrix of the Zephyrian Collective," the alien announced, its voice melodious yet firm. "In light of these revelations, we propose a compromise. Let us turn this incident into an opportunity for growth and cooperation." George listened intently as Thrix outlined a proposal for a comprehensive cultural and scientific exchange program between Earth and interested alien species. In return, all charges against the human delegation would be dropped. Seeing an opportunity to secure a diplomatic victory, George stepped forward. "We are open to this proposal," he said, his mind racing with possibilities. "However, we would like to negotiate for additional concessions." As George began to outline his request for increased human representation in galactic affairs and the establishment of a permanent human embassy, he could feel the tide turning in humanity's favor. The chamber buzzed with excitement at the prospect of this new era of cooperation. The final vote was tense, but as the results were announced, George felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The majority had voted in favor of the compromise, with even some of Xia's former allies switching sides. As the session concluded, George and his team found themselves surrounded by curious aliens, eager to learn more about these surprising humans. Journalists from across the galaxy clamored for interviews, their recording devices hovering in the air. Amidst the commotion, Ambassador Zorn approached George, his towering form casting a shadow over the human delegation. "Impressive, Ambassador Allen," Zorn said, his voice low enough for only George to hear. "You've certainly made an impact today, but remember, the galaxy will be watching Earth closely now. We'll be expecting great things from your people." George nodded, understanding the weight of Zorn's words. As he prepared to return to Earth to brief his government on these unprecedented developments, he knew that while they had won a significant victory today, the real challenge lay ahead. Humanity had earned its place at the galactic table, but now they would have to prove they deserved to keep it. The future of humanity's place in the galaxy was now secure, but the real work was just beginning. As George and his team boarded their ship for the journey back to Earth, a palpable sense of excitement filled the air. News of their diplomatic victory had already reached their home planet, and they were greeted as heroes upon their return. Cheering crowds lined the streets, waving banners and flags as the delegation made their way to the United Nations headquarters in New York. In the days that followed, George found himself thrust into a whirlwind of meetings, briefings, and press conferences. The Earth government, recognizing the enormous potential of this breakthrough, moved swiftly to capitalize on their newfound standing in the galactic community. Ambassador Allen, the Secretary General, addressed him during a high-level meeting. "Your actions have opened up unprecedented opportunities for humanity. We're establishing a new department to oversee our integration into galactic affairs, and we want you to lead it." George leaned forward, intrigued. "What exactly did you have in mind?" "The Interstellar Cultural Exchange Program," the Secretary General explained. "ICEP for short. You'll be responsible for implementing the exchange program agreed upon during the Council session and managing our new relationships with alien species." Without hesitation, George accepted the position. The next few months were a blur of activity as Earth transformed into a hub of interstellar diplomacy and scientific collaboration. Alien diplomats and researchers arrived in droves, eager to learn more about human culture and biology. George worked tirelessly to coordinate these exchanges, overseeing the establishment of research facilities, cultural centers, and diplomatic outposts around the globe. He often found himself marveling at the sight of humans and aliens working side by side, sharing knowledge and building bridges between their civilizations. One day, as George was reviewing reports in his office at ICEP headquarters, Dr. Emily Chen burst through the door, her eyes shining with excitement. "George, you won't believe what we've discovered," she exclaimed, waving a data pad in front of him. "What is it, Emily?" George asked, intrigued by her enthusiasm. Dr. Chen took a deep breath to compose herself. "Remember how the Zarantine scientist mentioned potential medicinal properties in human urine? Well, we've identified a unique enzyme that, when properly processed, can significantly extend the lifespan of several alien species. It's revolutionary." George's mind raced with the implications of this discovery. This could change everything, he mused, already considering the diplomatic and economic ramifications. As news of the miracle compound spread across the galaxy, Earth found itself at the center of an interstellar frenzy. Alien races clamored for access to this life-extending substance, and George worked closely with the Earth government to negotiate fair and beneficial trade agreements. However, not everyone was pleased with humanity's rising status. Reports began to trickle in of unauthorized attempts to obtain human biological samples. George met with Earth's security forces to implement protective measures for human citizens. "We need to be vigilant," he warned during a briefing with top officials. "Our newfound importance in the galaxy makes us a target for those who would exploit us." As if to underscore his point, an alert flashed across his communication device. A joint human-alien security force had just thwarted an attack on Earth's main urine processing facility by a group of Zarantine extremists. George frowned, recognizing the escalating tensions between Earth and Zarantine. He knew that High Counselor Sia had been running a propaganda campaign against humans, portraying them as deceptive and untrustworthy. Fortunately, most alien species had dismissed these claims, having experienced positive interactions with humans firsthand. As George prepared for an emergency galactic council session to address the Zarantine attack, he received an urgent, encrypted message from one of his alien contacts. The information it contained sent a chill down his spine. A shadowy interstellar syndicate had set its sights on Earth, planning a massive operation to harvest humans on an industrial scale. The potential profits from human biological compounds had attracted the attention of some of the galaxy's most dangerous criminal elements. George sat back in his chair, the weight of this new threat pressing down on him. He needed to find a way to protect humanity while maintaining the delicate diplomatic balance they'd achieved. He began to formulate a plan, reaching out to trusted allies like Ambassador Zorn and Dr. Kira Vex. As he coordinated with his team to prepare for the upcoming council session, George couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of a new era. The decisions made in the coming days would shape the course of human history for generations to come. With a determined set to his jaw, George rose from his desk and headed to the briefing room. It was time to rally Earth's defenders and face this new threat head-on. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and George Allen was ready to fight for his species' place among the stars. Stars. The weight of responsibility settled on George's shoulders as he strode purposefully toward the briefing room, his mind already racing with plans to safeguard humanity's future. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity, as George and his team at ICP worked tirelessly to strengthen Earth's defenses and diplomatic ties. However, their efforts were soon put to the test when news of a thwarted Zarantine extremist attack on Earth's main urine processing facility sent shockwaves through the galactic community. George found himself aboard the newly commissioned Earth starship Diplomacy en route to an emergency galactic council session. The sleek vessel hummed with energy as it sliced through space, carrying the hopes and fears of humanity with it. As George reviewed his notes for the upcoming diplomatic showdown, his communication device chimed urgently. Dr. Emily Chen's face appeared on the screen, her expression a mix of excitement and concern. "George, we've made a critical discovery," she said, her voice tense. "The enzyme we've been distributing? It has an unforeseen side effect. Long-term use increases aggression and territorial behavior in most alien species." George's blood ran cold as he processed the implications. "How certain are you?" "The data is conclusive," Emily replied. "We need to act fast." Before George could respond, a shadow fell across his desk. He looked up to see Ambassador Zorn's imposing figure looming over him. "Ambassador Allen," Zorn rumbled, his multifaceted eyes glinting. "We've identified the syndicate threatening Earth. They call themselves the Consortium, and they have ties to several governments, including rogue Zarantine elements. George's mind raced, connecting the dots between this new information and the impending council session. He knew the next few hours would be crucial. As the Diplomacy docked at the space station orbiting a massive gas giant, George steeled himself for the challenges ahead. The council chamber buzzed with tension as delegates from across the galaxy took their seats. High Counselor Sia wasted no time in launching his attack. "Esteemed colleagues," he began, his tentacles quivering with terrifying rage, "I present evidence of human espionage and unauthorized experimentation." George countered swiftly, revealing the details of the Zarantine extremist attack on Earth's facility. The chamber erupted into heated debate, factions forming and dissolving as arguments flew back and forth. Suddenly, a deafening alarm cut through the chaos. The station shook violently, and panicked voices filled the air. "We're under attack," someone shouted. George's training kicked in as he assessed the situation. "Everyone, stay calm," he commanded, his voice carrying authority. "We need to evacuate immediately." As if on cue, the chamber doors burst open, revealing a squad of heavily armed aliens. Their leader, a scarred and menacing figure, stepped forward. "I am Krax," he snarled, leveling a plasma rifle at the assembled delegates. "You will all come with us. Resist, and you die." George exchanged a quick glance with Ambassador Zorn, who nodded almost imperceptibly. In a fluid motion, George activated his emergency beacon, signaling the human security detail. Chaos erupted as delegates scrambled for cover. George and Zorn led the charge, guiding as many aliens as they could towards the emergency exits. The sound of weapons fire filled the air as consortium forces clashed with station security. As they fought their way through the corridors, George and his team stumbled upon a hidden laboratory. Inside, they found startling evidence of the consortium's experiments with human biological samples. "They've been at this for months," George muttered, quickly downloading the data to a secure device. The group pressed on, battling through waves of consortium troops. As they approached the docking bays, George made a split-second decision. "Broadcast Dr. Chen's findings on all channels," he ordered his communications officer. "The galaxy needs to know the truth." The revelation sent shockwaves through both the attacking forces and the retreating delegates. Confusion and disbelief rippled through the crowds, momentarily halting the fighting. Taking advantage of the lull, George and his team made a final push for the Diplomacy. They were mere meters from safety when Krax and his elite squad cornered them in the docking bay. "Surrender, humans!" Krax roared, his weapons trained on George. The standoff was broken by an unexpected arrival. High Counselor Zia, separated from his guards, stumbled into the bay. Taking in the scene, the Zarantine made a surprising choice. "Enough!" Zia bellowed, using his access codes to override the station's systems. The docking bay doors began to close, trapping Krax and his forces inside. George and his team seized the moment, rushing aboard the Diplomacy as Zia held off the consortium troops. As the ship's engines roared to life, George caught a final glimpse of the Zarantine counselor, standing defiantly against the attackers. The Diplomacy broke free from the station, streaking away into the void of space. As the adrenaline of their escape began to fade, George's communication device lit up with an urgent message from Earth. "Ambassador Allen," a grim-faced official appeared on the screen. "The galaxy is in turmoil. Violence is erupting on worlds that have been using the enzyme. We're receiving reports of widespread unrest and panic." George closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the situation bearing down on him. As the Diplomacy set course for Earth, he knew that the true test of humanity's place in the galaxy was only just beginning. The true test of humanity's place in the galaxy was unfolding before George's eyes as the Diplomacy hurtled through space towards Earth. The ship's communication systems crackled with constant updates, each more dire than the last. Worlds that had embraced the human enzyme were descending into chaos, with reports of riots and widespread violence flooding in from across the galaxy. George stood at the bridge, his eyes hardened as he absorbed the gravity of the situation. The screen before him displayed a map of affected planets, red indicators blinking ominously across its surface. "Ambassador," called out the ship's captain, We're receiving an urgent transmission from Earth. They're requesting your immediate presence at an emergency meeting upon our arrival." George nodded, his mind already racing with potential strategies. As the blue orb of Earth grew larger in the view screen, he turned to Dr. Emily Chen, who had joined him on the bridge. "Emily, I need you to gather every scrap of data we have on the enzyme's effects. We'll need it for the meeting." The scientist nodded grimly, her fingers flying over a datapad as she compiled the information. The Diplomacy touched down at the newly constructed interstellar spaceport outside Geneva. Its sleek form barely settled on the landing pad before George and his team were whisked away to the United Earth Government headquarters. The meeting room was a cacophony of raised voices and frantic gestures as George entered. World leaders, military commanders, and scientific advisors all vied to be heard, their faces etched with worry and fear. "Silence!" boomed the voice of the Secretary General, cutting through the din. All eyes turned to George as he took his place at the table. "Ambassador Allen, please brief us on the situation." George took a deep breath, his voice steady as he recounted the events aboard the space station and the revelation of the enzyme's side effects. The room grew tense as he described the consortium's involvement and the growing galactic unrest. "We're facing a two-pronged crisis," George concluded. "The immediate threat of retaliation from affected species and the long-term danger posed by the consortium's manipulation of galactic affairs." Debate erupted once more, with some officials advocating for Earth to close its borders and weather the storm in isolation, while others pushed for a more aggressive, preemptive strike against potential threats. As arguments flew back and forth, George's communication device buzzed. His eyes widened as he read the incoming message. "Ladies and gentlemen," he interrupted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I've just received a communication from an unexpected source. High Counselor Sia of the Zarantine Federation is proposing a temporary alliance." The room fell silent, stunned by this turn of events. George quickly relayed Zia's message, explaining the consortium's opportunistic power grab amidst the galactic turmoil. "This could be our chance," George urged, "to address both crises simultaneously. A joint human Zarantine task force could strike at the heart of the consortium while we work on diplomatic solutions with other affected species." The Secretary General leaned forward, her eyes narrowed in thought. "It's a risk, but one we might have to take. Ambassador Allen, you have my authorization to proceed with this alliance. Assemble your team and coordinate with the Zarantine forces." As the meeting adjourned, George pulled Dr. Chen aside. "Emily, I need you to lead a research team. We need an antidote for the enzyme's side effects, and we need it fast." Emily nodded, drive etched on her face. "I'll get our best minds on it immediately. We'll work around the clock if we have to." George spent the next few hours in a flurry of activity, assembling a crack team for the joint mission and coordinating with Earth's military to prepare for any potential attacks. As he worked, reports came in of a massive alien fleet approaching the solar system, their intentions unknown but likely hostile. In the midst of the preparations, George received another transmission from Sia. The Zarantine leader's face appeared on the screen, his tentacles twitching with a mix of anxiety and determination. "Ambassador Allen," Zia began, his voice gravelly through the translator, "our forces are en route to the rendezvous point. I hope you understand the gravity of this alliance. Our species have been at odds, but the consortium threatens us all." George nodded solemnly. "I understand, High Counselor. We're prepared to do whatever it takes to stop the consortium and restore peace to the galaxy." As George ended the transmission, he turned to face the viewport. The Earth hung suspended in the void, beautiful and fragile. He knew that the decisions made in the coming hours would shape the fate of not just humanity, but countless species across the stars. With a deep breath, George stepped onto the bridge of the advanced stealth ship that would carry the joint task force to their target. As the engines hummed to life, he addressed the assembled human and Zarantine crew. "We face a formidable enemy," he began, his voice carrying through the ship's intercom. "The consortium has sown chaos throughout the galaxy, manipulating us all for their gain. But today, we stand united. Human and Zarantine, once adversaries, now allies against a common threat." The crew listened intently, a mix of tenacity and apprehension on their faces. "Our mission is clear," George continued. "We will strike at the heart of the consortium's operations, expose their crimes to the galaxy, and retrieve the stolen enzyme samples. The road ahead is dangerous, but the fate of our worlds, of the entire galactic community, rests on our success." As George finished speaking, the ship's captain announced their departure. The sleek vessel rose silently from the launch pad, its advanced cloaking technology rendering it invisible to the naked eye. As they accelerated towards the edge of the solar system, George's thoughts turned to the challenges that lay ahead. The consortium's hidden base, the formidable defenses they would face, and the ever-present threat of the alien fleet approaching Earth. He knew that the coming battle would test them all to their limits. But as he looked around at the determined faces of his human and Zarantine comrades, George felt a glimmer of hope. Together, they had a chance to set things right and forge a new path for galactic cooperation. The ship streaked through space, carrying with it the hopes of Earth and the Zarantine Federation. As they approached the asteroid field that concealed the consortium's base, George steeled himself for the confrontation to come. The future of the cosmos hung in the balance, and he was dedication to see this mission through, regardless of the cost. To see this mission through, regardless of the cost. As the ship approached the asteroid field concealing the consortium's base, George felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins. "We're entering the field now," announced the Zarantine pilot, her tentacles deftly manipulating the controls, activating stealth systems. The ship weaved through the dense cluster of asteroids, its advanced cloaking technology rendering it invisible to the consortium's scanners. As they neared their target, George turned to High Counselor Sia, who stood beside him on the bridge. "Are your teams ready, Counselor?" George asked, his voice low and steady. Sia's multifaceted eyes glinted with persistence. "They are, Ambassador. We will not fail in our mission." The asteroid base loomed before them, a massive structure carved into the rocky surface. As they approached, the ship's sensors detected a flurry of activity within the base. "They know we're here," growled the human security chief. "Our window of surprise is closing fast." George nodded grimly. "Then we move now. All teams, prepare for insertion." The next few minutes were a blur of activity as the joint human-Zarantine task force deployed from the ship. Using personal stealth devices, they infiltrated the base through multiple entry points, catching the consortium forces off guard. George led his team through the winding corridors, their path illuminated by the eerie glow of emergency lighting. The sound of weapon fire echoed through the base as the task force engaged the consortium's security forces. As they fought their way deeper into the base, alarms began to blare, the shrill sound reverberating off the metallic walls. The entire structure shook, debris raining down from the ceiling. "They've initiated a self-destruct sequence," shouted Dr. Chen over the comms. "We have less than 10 minutes before this whole place blows." George's mind raced as he assessed their options. They had come too far to turn back now. His eyes met Zia's, and in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. "We're going through with the plan," George announced, his voice carrying over the chaos. "We'll broadcast the truth and download the data. Everyone else, get to the extraction point." As the rest of the team fought to secure their escape route, George and Zia sprinted towards the base's central control room. They encountered heavy resistance, but the combined skills of the human diplomat and the Zarantine leader proved formidable. They burst into the control room, quickly dispatching the consortium operatives inside. George's fingers flew over the alien console, activating the base's long-range communication array. "This is Ambassador George Allen of Earth," he began, his voice broadcasting across the galaxy. "What you are about to hear is the truth about the consortium and their manipulation of galactic affairs." As George spoke, revealing the consortium's crimes and the true nature of the enzyme crisis, Zia worked furiously to download all the incriminating data from the servers. The base shuddered around them, the self-destruct sequence counting down relentlessly. With seconds to spare, they completed their tasks. George grabbed the data storage device from Zia, and they raced out of the control room. The corridors were now a maze of falling debris and sparking electrical systems. They could hear the sounds of battle growing closer as they approached the hangar. The human Zarantine task force was fighting desperately to hold off waves of consortium troops trying to cut off their escape. George and Zia rounded the final corner, the hangar bay doors in sight. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the base, nearly throwing them off their feet. The blast wave propelled them forward, sending them tumbling into the hangar just as their ships were preparing for emergency takeoff. "Go, go, go!" George shouted, scrambling aboard the nearest vessel, with Shia close behind. The ships lifted off, their engines straining against the increasing gravity as the asteroid began to break apart. They soared out of the hangar, narrowly avoiding debris and enemy fire. As they cleared the asteroid field, George looked back to see the consortium base erupting into a brilliant fireball. The explosion consumed the asteroid, obliterating years of illegal operations and stolen biological samples in an instant. The task force regrouped, their ships forming a protective formation around the Diplomacy. As they set course for Earth, George allowed himself a moment of relief. They had succeeded in their mission, but he knew the real challenge was yet to come. The journey back to Earth was tense, filled with anticipation and uncertainty. As they approached the blue planet, they were met with an awe-inspiring sight. A massive fleet of alien ships surrounded Earth, their intentions still unknown. George stood on the bridge of the Diplomacy, his heart pounding as they neared the planet. The ship's communication system crackled to life, incoming transmissions flooding in from the gathered alien species. To his surprise, the messages were not filled with threats of retaliation, but with confusion, anger directed at the consortium, and calls for explanation. The galactic broadcast had changed the situation dramatically, shifting the blame away from humanity. As Earth grew larger in the view screen, George prepared himself for what would undoubtedly be the most important address of his life. The fate of humanity and the future of galactic relations hung in the balance, and he was determined to seize this opportunity for peace.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.